Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Trey Farkas, and on today's episode, my conversation with Nissa Bagelman, the owner of Reedmor Books and Brews, a new Portsmouth bookstore that everyone is telling me about. It's 1995, and it's a beautiful summer day in Center City, Philadelphia. A gray-haired David Bagelman is stacking the shelves of Reedmor Books, the bookstore his father Charles opened in 1928, shortly after he fled Russia. David took over the store years ago, devoting most of his life to working in Reedmor's 3 locations throughout the city. Reedmor isn't just any bookstore, it's a treasure chest of American history. They collect rare books you might find at garage sales or historic magazines like the first edition of Playboy. Reedmor is the family business, except David's son Steve burnt out of it after college and chose a career in special education instead. But Steve's 6-year-old daughter Nissa is infatuated with books. And on this day, as she often does, Nissa visits Reedmor after getting her nails done with her grandmother. She scans the shelves and finds an old copy of Peter Pan, and she marvels at it. It's another book to add to her growing stack of books she leaves next to her bed. Nissa adores the smell of books and the feeling she gets when she turns a page. But best of all, she loves finding friends in books and traveling to faraway lands with them. But once the internet comes around, the bookstore business suffers. Because everyone can find old books on eBay or new books on Amazon, Reedmor loses its appeal, and the changing market forces the Bagelmans to close Reedmor in the early 2000s. That is, until Nissa, the book lover since birth, reopens Reedmor 23 years later in 382 miles northeast of Philly, in the heart of downtown Portsmouth. On today's episode, Nissa explains why she reopened Reedmor and what makes this bookstore different than the others on the Seacoast. Plus, a look into the chaos behind their December grand opening, and she discusses the evolving book industry and why, even with ebooks and audiobooks abound, the paperback will never die. To begin, we travel back to college, that lovely time when none of us know quite what to do with our lives.
You know, in college, I thought of a bunch of different career paths. I think journalism was probably the direction that I originally wanted to go in.
Good thing you didn't.
Yeah. I'd be giving you a run for your money.
Yeah.
I tried that. Like, after I graduated, I volunteer copy edited a newspaper in Boston, and I contributed a few articles for them. And it was mostly about authors and books because I was never too far away from that. But with journalism, it felt too much like just the facts. And there wasn't much creativity there. Like, I would write an article and I would try to use like flowery language, and then
Yeah, it doesn't fly.
And then they would cut everything. It would be like, no, he said, she said, They said.
Police said.
And I'm like, no, like we said enough times already. So yeah, and at the same time I was working at Borders, if you remember.
R.I.P. Borders.
R.I.P. Borders indeed. And that was right when Borders filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, was when I was working there. So it was in late 2010. And I was there for about 6 months. And then I got my first publishing job. I had been looking at publishing for a while. Like, once it was clear that I wanted books rather than news, I started looking in the publishing industry and applying. But it's a very difficult industry to get your foot in the door, especially if you live not in New York City.
Right.
And at the time I lived in Boston. So there's a tiny publishing scene in Boston, but nothing like New York.
So I'm curious, working at Borders and Borders filing for bankruptcy, did this spook you at all about the future of the book business?
No. That's so funny. No, it didn't. But it was also a time when that was when e-readers were on the rise. Right. And the big fear was, e-readers are going to replace physical books. And, the print word is going to go away entirely. And that just didn't happen.
Why do you think that is?
I think nothing can replace the experience of holding a book and turning a page and like watching yourself progress through it, but also be able to turn back to sections that spoke to you, or if you need to review who characters are, and just, it's a lot harder to do that when you're e-reading. And there's also no collecting aspect of it. Like people like to build a library, which feels homey and cozy, but it's also kind of like an art project for your home too. And I think it's a point of pride for people, their libraries and their collections of books. And if everything lives in a tiny device, it's just not the same.
Yeah, I personally have never really gotten on the ebook trend for some of the reasons you just mentioned, but also we spend so much of our time behind screens and looking at screens already. When I'm reading a book, I don't want that to be a part of it. Because then even if a Kindle reader is dumbed down to where you really can't do much on it other than read a book, still there's temptations to go play a game or something.
And I think it has a place like everything does. If you're traveling and you're not trying to weigh your suitcase down with 5 different books, it's really easy to have a sleek e-reader with you. Though I have to point out, you did say Kindle, which is Amazon's brand specifically. Right. And that's another big challenge.
Yes. It's like the Kleenex. You know, Kleenex is a brand of tissues, not synonymous with tissues.
Exactly. Yes. And also when I was working at Borders online store was borders.com powered by amazon.com.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know they were in partnership with each other.
It was before Amazon became what it is. Yeah. Amazon was just kind of an online retailer.
Right.
And it seemed
People
like,
forget that.
Right. This is a great way for us to get our sales online. And so they partnered with Amazon, which I think was one of a few things that led to their demise. But just the way that Amazon has slowly but surely monopolized not just our industry, but every industry.
Yeah, seriously.
And so, that's a conversation I have every day with people when they're talking about audiobooks, for example. The way that you said, a Kindle rather than an e-reader. People just assume they can only use Audible to listen to
Spotify.
audiobooks.
We have them with Spotify. I work at Spotify, so I'm plugging that.
There's also a company called Libro FM, which supports independent bookstores.
Cool.
So it's just, I think there's some education that needs to happen for people to know that there are alternatives to Amazon. I don't think that people necessarily want to be giving all their money to Amazon.
Yeah.
It's obviously convenient when you have to get something quickly, but I think if people knew that there are alternatives and there are ways that you can support your local businesses, they want to do that. So that's something that I've tried to take on with the stores, just giving people alternatives to Amazon and kind of teaching them where you can spend your money that's keeping it in the community.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the state of the book industry, but let's get back to your story. So it's around 2010, Borders is done, and you want to get into publishing. So you later moved to Boston. I don't know much about the publishing industry. What exactly were you doing at your job there?
So I was there for about 3.5 years. I was a sales assistant. So I started just right away in sales, but that wasn't necessarily what I had wanted. I mean, I think everyone goes into publishing thinking they're going to be an editor. Because that's another thing people don't realize is that there are many jobs in publishing that aren't just editing books.
Like what?
Like publicity and marketing and sales. And those are kind of obvious ones, but there's something called subsidiary rights that people have no idea what that is. So when you're selling the rights to translate a book or to have an audio edition of a book, or even for a professor to use a book in their curriculum, you need to get permissions for that.
Right.
So that's another job is granting rights and selling rights to different things. So there's a lot of things you can do in publishing. And I think if you want to get into it, you kind of just have to take what you can get and see where that leads you. And in fact, that just led me down a sales road, and I never left the sales part of the industry. I did move to New York in 2017. And that was to take a job at a larger publisher in a sales manager role. So I worked there for a few years, had a great time in my job. I loved the company. I loved my coworkers. I loved the books that we were publishing. I hated living in New York.
Yeah.
And that's hard when you work with books to not want to live in New York.
Right.
It just Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
So when you you were in the sales wing of publishing, what exactly does that entail?
Sure. So I worked in another industry of publishing that people don't know exists, which is called special sales. It's fun to have special in front of your title, though,
Yeah.
I will say. So special sales is non-traditional markets. So not retail and not Amazon and not big chains like Target or Barnes & Noble or whatever. So I was selling to catalogs because there are still people who buy their items out of catalogs, like circle what they want in a catalog.
There are?
There are.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was selling to online retailers that were more specialty and also flash sale sites. So I was selling to people like Groupon.
Oh, wow. R.I.P. to them.
Yeah. And Zulily. And then specialty wholesalers. So I would sell to like garden center distributors. So we would sell gardening books to those people who would then sell into retail places. So I was working in special sales.
Okay.
So that's what I was doing.
Okay. And you enjoyed this?
I just loved working with books and I
Yeah.
loved working with book people.
Yeah.
People in the publishing industry, it's kind of a self-selecting group of just very intelligent, more liberal people who just believe in the power of the written word. And it's hard not to get along with people like that.
Yeah. I'm curious, when people enter into an industry that they grew up a fan of. For example, I work in sports and I was a sports fan my whole life. Then I got to work in sports at ESPN, the leader in sports media. And when I saw, quote unquote, how the sausage is
Sure.
made, I start to lose a love of sports to the point where on my own time now, I don't really consume sports. I couldn't be bothered. The day that we're speaking, there's 2 big NFL games. I'm going to watch them for like 5 minutes. But when I was 15, I would watch the whole thing and then consume 10 different podcasts about them. So it burned me out of it. So I'm wondering, at any point when you were working in publishing, were you surprised by some things that you saw? Were you disgusted by some things that you saw?
I'd say disgusted is a strong word.
Yeah.
I think like any industry, the publishing industry has its controversies. Certainly there's a lot lately about AI, for example.
Yeah, every
There's-
industry.
Yeah, with, using publishers' works or using authors' works to train AI without permission or consent, AI replacing jobs. But also before that, like the big thing was appropriation.
Mm.
And so there would be a lot of controversy about like a white author writing from a perspective of a Black character or something like that. Like people writing about experiences that weren't their own lived experiences.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of controversy around that. And the question is like, where does the line lie with fiction? If it's fiction, the whole idea is that this isn't your experience. But then, what gives you the right to put yourself in the shoes of someone who you haven't had that lived experience? So these are always questions and controversies that plague the publishing industry.
Yeah, these are things I never really thought about.
Yeah. And then, of course, I think it's very difficult to make a living wage in the publishing industry, especially if you live in New York City, where rent and cost of living is so high. It's a notoriously low-paying industry. People don't do it for the money. They do it for the love. So I guess to answer your question, I never burnt out on reading or a love of literature because I couldn't do it if I didn't still love it.
Right. Okay. So you didn't love New York City.
Correct.
Why not?
I think New York City just calls to some people
Yeah.
that like from birth, they just like have to be in New York. It's like where they belong. And I'm so not that person. I like visiting.
Yeah.
But I'm like even more happy going home than I am arriving there. It's so impersonal. For a city that has so many people, it's very lonely. It's hard to make friends. It's hard to break into groups of people. And I'm also a person who just likes personal space, and living in a closet with 6 roommates is just not my idea of luxury living. So yeah, I wanted some outdoor space and friends and a community. And I just didn't feel like I had a community when I was in New York.
That's wild. My friends in New York, they'll boast about it and say there's something for everyone. You can join any group you want. You can join any book club you want. There's a group of people waiting to accept you. You just have to go find them.
True.
So.
But I think if you ask those same people, they would tell you that it took a few years for them to really find their footing and find their people.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to give it a few years.
Yeah.
I also always loved Boston. And I knew when I moved to New York, I knew I was going to come back to Boston. I ended up moving back without a job. So that was kind of scary.
Oh.
I looked for a job for a while and it's difficult.
So did you quit your New York job?
I did, but I gave them 6 months of notice.
Okay.
So we left on very good, friendly terms, which was great because the job that I ended up finding, not 6 weeks later, was to be an independent sales rep for bookstores. So I traveled around to bookstores, to indie bookstores, selling them books on behalf of publishers. And the publisher that I worked for was the one that I had worked for in New York.
Okay. And did you find this more fulfilling, that indie nature of it?
I loved working with indies. Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's so much more personal. And I got to go to hundreds of independent bookstores and just hang out with people. Like my job was to go travel to cool bookstores and sit and hang out with the owners and the buyers and the managers and just chat about books and life and the industry. And that was work.
And you got to just see different bookstores and observe what they were doing and potentially plant some seeds for future businesses.
Seeds were planted. Yes.
Okay. So a few years later, you open where we are right now. When you were visiting those bookstores, what were the takeaways that you had that really informed how you thought about this place?
The biggest thing that I learned that I probably should have already known, but I was an idealist, was that a lot of indie bookstores aren't profitable. And the people that are running them aren't supporting themselves from the bookstore. They either have other income or, are married to someone who's supporting their families. And in my mind, it was the most important thing was sustainability. Watching stores close is heartbreaking, especially obviously during the pandemic. A lot of stores closed. And so while I wanted to do it, wanted to open my own business, I waited until I felt like a time, first of all, when people could gather without masks on and feel safe doing that. So that was certainly something that put my plans on hold. But it was very important to me from the beginning that this store would sustain itself and, support me and the employees that I hired. And I wanted to pay my employees a living wage. Like I wanted this to be a place that people wanted to work, wanted to hang out in. And so I thought, I guess I started from what is the kind of place where I would want to be? So I'm going to build that. I'm going to build a place that I would want to hang out.
Exactly.
And then hope that other people feel the same way.
Yeah. I've always been curious, and I'm sure just from going to all these bookstores, you can speak to it. Of these indie bookstores that weren't sustainable, what is the business model of those places?
Yeah, that's a great question because they all sort of shared something in common, which is that they had the business model that worked in the 70s and 80s and 90s before the big box stores like a Borders and a Barnes & Noble came in, before the internet, before Amazon, and didn't make any changes to that business model. And it just isn't sustainable in this day and age with the way the market is. And so those were the people that were only selling books and nothing else. So no gift items, like maybe reading glasses or bookmarks, but that wasn't really doing anything to improve their margins or bring more people in the door other than the people who are already coming in to buy books.
So, for example, a book that's flying off the shelves right now, which I think you guys have here as well, The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Everyone and their mother's telling me about this book. So say one of these indie bookstores has Let Them Theory. Do they buy the book from the publisher or from Amazon for $25 and then sell it in their store for $27? Is that how this works?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they buy it from the publisher. They're certainly not buying it from Amazon.
Okay.
They'll buy it from the publisher or they'll buy it from a distributor for between a 40 and 50% discount.
Got it.
Usually. And then they sell it to the customer most of the time at the MSRP, so the manufacturer's suggested retail price.
Okay.
And those prices are printed on books, which is also why it's difficult for people to charge anything other than that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So whereas like you could mark up a drink as much as you want, if there's a book that says $29.99 and you're saying, oh, it's $35, people are going to have something to say about that.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So thank you for that. I've always been curious about that. So you said that you started getting an idea for your own bookstore during the early days of COVID?
Before that,
Before then.
During the early days of being a sales rep.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is something that's been percolating for a while.
Yeah. So I was a sales rep for over 7 years. And I'd say probably in year one was when the idea started percolating.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it was just kind of what you said, is seeing these stores and seeing the things that they were doing right and the things that I felt like they were doing wrong, and thinking like, I could do this. Not I could do it better necessarily, but I could do it differently. And I could build a store that pulls in all the elements that I love and admire about the stores that I think are doing it right, and let go of the things that I think aren't working. And that just kind of sharpened over time the more bookstores that I saw. And then the first time that I went to a bookstore bar, that was just it for me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's like, this is what we need, a bookstore bar.
So aside from the COVID delay, why did it take you so long?
Fear's part of it. Obviously, quitting my cushy job that I explained how great it was.
Yeah.
To then know that I was going to be spending every minute of every day on this business, that I needed to be ready to make that kind of a life change. And I also needed to be sure of where I wanted to do it. And that was something that moved around a few times. It was not until fairly recently that I decided on Portsmouth.
Where else were you thinking about having your bookstore?
So at the time, I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I went to Tufts University, and I'm a big fan of that area, and Somerville and Davis Square. And that really felt like a community that was perfect for the type of business that I wanted to open, because I knew that I was going to be opening a more modern take on a traditional bookstore. And I needed to have the right clientele for that. And Davis Square really felt like the right clientele for that. And it felt like where I wanted to live and where I wanted to be. And
college students would eat it up too.
Yes, for sure. And college students are also a replenishing audience every year. Mm-hmm. You're getting new people. And it's also like Davis Square has really been on the rise the past few years as far as young families moving there. Yeah. And that kind of felt like the holy grail. Like that's where I wanted to be. And I knew it was going to be challenging. I heard from everybody that it would be challenging to get a liquor license in Massachusetts, that they were so expensive, and there was like a lottery of numbers of liquor licenses available in different cities, and if they were all spoken for already, then they couldn't give any more out. And so that was also just something that scared me a little bit, not knowing how to go about all the steps that would be involved. Though I did start to pursue that avenue. I met with the city, and I started thinking about it, started looking at spaces. And then someone else opened a bookstore in Davis Square while I was in that process. And because my whole ethos is, community first, Main Street first, I didn't want to compete with somebody else who was doing something similar. It wasn't the mindset that I was in. I wanted it to be everyone supported each other and lifted each other up rather than undercutting each other's sales.
Gotcha. Okay, so it doesn't work out.
So it doesn't work out in Somerville. And that kind of set me back for a while because I wasn't sure where the place would be. And I had moved up to Newburyport a few years ago. And so Portsmouth was definitely on my radar as another town that felt hip and vibrant and like a good fit for the type of business that I wanted. But not only did Portsmouth have an independent bookstore, they had 3 independent bookstores.
Right.
And one of them was Book and Bar. So already the concept, or similar to the concept that I wanted. So it just seemed like a non-starter here. And so I was more just like waiting until I knew where to do it. And I guess everything changed when I read a year ago the news that Book and Bar was closing.
Yeah. What was your initial reaction when you saw that news?
This is my chance.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I'm not excited to see a business going out of business, but it did feel like this was an opening that I had been waiting for.
So how quickly did you act after finding out that news?
Immediately.
Wow.
Yes.
What was the first step?
The first step was to try to contact Book and Bar to see if they would be interested in selling their business or having someone buy out the remainder of their lease. And I tried that. That was a dead end. I didn't get any response. And then I sort of had a eureka moment. I could find another space. It doesn't have to be there. So just started poking around a little bit at listings, and this place, which was formerly Raleigh Wine Bar and Eatery. It was the first place that I found. Actually, my former boss, when I was a sales rep, was the one who found it, sent it to me and said, "This place is cute." I agreed that it was cute. I went to see it a couple days later, and I knew instantly that this was the place. I didn't look at any others.
Wow. Why were you so convinced this was the spot?
It just felt good. You know, when you just have that feeling of this is right, this is it. It felt like home. And I'd never set foot in this place before then, and yet it felt like home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so this, if I recall, is in March 2024, and you opened in mid-December. So I know you had a lengthy negotiation with the landlord on a couple aspects of the lease. We don't have to dig into finances too much, but you worked in the publishing industry a while, which is a notoriously underpaying industry. So if you don't mind me asking, how are you funding this business?
So I am proud to say 100% on my own. I am funding this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So when I moved from working in-house in a publishing house to being an independent sales rep, there's a lot more money there.
Oh, wow.
Which was good. And we had a few really good years in a row. After things opened up from COVID again, we had some really good years. And I saved every extra penny that I made and built myself a little savings fund specifically for this purpose. I did not touch that money.
Wow.
And now it's funded in the bookstore.
Coming up, why Nissa is continuing the family legacy, an inside look into how bookstores operate, and why a, quote, bag of dicks is flying off the shelves. But first, we have something very exciting to share. So Seacoast Stories is a podcast where we highlight incredible people doing big things on the Seacoast. But beyond that, and more importantly than that, this show is about getting people together. The live podcast last month was the first step, but that show was just the beginning of what we plan to do this year. I can't say too much yet, but think group workouts, Seacoast excursions, and meetups with a Seacoast Stories twist. To stay up to date on these plans, please follow us on Eventbrite at Seacoast Stories Podcast. The link is in the show notes. By doing so, you'll find out everything you need to know about our events, and you can be the first to get your hands on limited tickets before we sell out. Ray Lambert said at the live show that the way to make friends or to find love is to show up in person and to do it consistently. At Seacoast Stories, we're creating opportunities for you to do just that. Thank you in advance for signing up. We can't wait to see you at a future event. And thank you for being here today as well. We really appreciate it. Now back to today's story. Why did you choose to continue the family legacy of Reedmor?
It was always going to be Reedmor, but it wasn't necessarily always going to be spelled the way that it's spelled. So I'm sure eagle-eyed folks will realize that Reedmor is not spelled R-E-A-D space M-O-R-E on our sign. And that was something that I really struggled with because the spelling that we have now is the spelling from back in the 20s. And it was a family name and a family legacy. But I'm an English major, and having something be spelled incorrectly and not having a great answer for people as to why, it was something that troubled me.
I think it is a great answer, though, because you can say this was the family business. This was how they spelled it. That's awesome.
Right. But it's not my last name. It wasn't their last name. It looks like it should be a last name, and maybe I will change my name someday. That might be fun.
Nissa Reedmor.
Yeah.
Love that.
Does it have a nice ring to it?
It does. It really does.
But yeah, so I went back and forth on the spelling a lot. Like, do I do Reedmor as one word but spelled correctly? Do I do it as two words and spelled correctly? Do I do it the way it was? And ultimately, it felt like the through line with the family legacy. It needed to be Reedmor spelled the way that it's spelled. But it also, I love that because I hired a fantastic graphic designer who reimagined the original Reedmor logo and script. And that's what it is now. So it's pretty close to what the logo was then.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
How do you think your grandparents would feel about this place?
I think they would be so proud and so excited and so confused about the whole structure of this place, having a bar and cafe, selling gift items and socks, and they would just be so confused. But they'd be really excited and really proud of me.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I'm sure there's so many things that you had to do behind the scenes to get this place up and running, obviously. What were some of the things that you had to do to prepare for launch that you never would have anticipated that you had to do?
All of the licensing with the city. I mean, I knew I needed a liquor license, and I knew to get that I needed food, and that would involve a food permit as well. But certain things that I didn't know existed, like a FOG permit, that stands for fat, oil, and grease.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I have a FOG permit.
Okay.
And I have a place of assembly permit from the fire department. I have a building permit. So yeah, just permit after permit after permit was something that I didn't see coming.
And were these easy to obtain?
I will say the city of Portsmouth is fantastic. I don't know that everyone can say that about their local government, but everyone that I worked with in the city was so helpful, so patient with explaining everything to me, who was a complete newbie, and just like nice. Some of them have stopped in just to say hi and see how things are going. And I had a really great experience working with the city.
Wow. Okay. And so as you were planning all of this, a Seacoastonline article came out that was announcing there's going to be a new bookstore in town. And it's my understanding that that really blew you up overnight.
Yeah, it did. So we launched our social media in early August, I think. And the article came out, I want to say early September, and our following just ballooned overnight. Wow. Yeah. I didn't realize so many people read Seacoastonline, but they do. And now I'm getting recognized like I'm some kind of D-list celebrity. It's pretty wild. Yeah. When we were putting the store together, like actually getting the bookcases in and putting books on shelves, which was another very huge part of opening, obviously, was getting all the inventory in. But as we were doing that, we were in here moving around, doing things, and people could see that there were people inside the store, but we weren't open yet. And so we had people taking pictures. We had people walking up to the door and peeking in. We had people waltzing in the front door, even like clearly knowing that we weren't open yet. Like there were just people really wanted to know what was going on in here.
Yeah.
And as we got closer to opening, that ramped up to the point that we had to keep the door locked because multiple people daily would just walk in.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were really excited that they were really excited, but we're like, can you just wait a few more days?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of pent up excitement because with Book and Bar going away. And I do want to use this as an opportunity to make it very clear that there is no affiliation between Reedmor and Book and Bar. This is not the new Book and Bar, as I've heard from several people as well. You guys aren't in business with them in any way. So I just want to make that clear for everyone that you guys are your own entity doing your own thing.
That's correct. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Because I know people have been confused about that. All right. So inventory. How did you go about thinking, what kind of books do we want to get in here? And how do you get the books in here?
Yeah, so this is a question I get all the time from customers, especially, is how did you decide what to bring in? How did you get this selection of books? And I would say that's where my experience in the publishing industry really served me. I've never been in food service. I've never been a bartender. So that side of things was completely new to me. And so I brought on some pretty amazingly talented people to really take ownership of that piece of it. But for me, my time to shine was on the book side. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to carry every single book in the world that I wanted to, right? This isn't the size of a Barnes and Noble.
Right.
I would have to make some choices. And because we do have a bar, it felt like kids' books would be an easy kind of thing to let go of. So we do get questions a lot about if we have a kids section, if we're ever going to have a kids section. Currently, we do not carry children's books. That might change at some point in the future, but it's not an immediate plan. But we do have hot chocolate and cookies and muffins and things that will appeal if you bring your kids in.
Uh-huh.
And then as far as like what books for adults do we carry? That's another thing that I really took note of when I was on the road visiting bookstores is how they were supplying books. So you can buy books directly from publishers and you can buy books from wholesalers. And if you're buying from wholesalers, they come faster and it's an easier process, but you lose a lot of money that way. You lose margin. It's a lower discount. And so it was very important to me to not leave money on the table and to get the best discounts possible because then I could carry more books. And so I set up accounts with all the publishers that I wanted to work with. And I have some really great software. So my point of sale system, it's a book specific point of sale system. And with this software, I can see a ranking of best-selling titles in order in any category. And so I just basically went through the top 2,000 titles right now, brought in everything that I wanted to. And then for all the authors that I was carrying, I looked at their previous titles, brought in things that I wanted to, and then just kind of decided from there. I had to make some guesses about what I thought that the community would want to see. Right now, romantasy, which is romance fantasy, is really big. And so I brought in a lot of that. Come to find out, we don't have a huge readership in Portsmouth for that category.
Okay.
So that's something that you kind of learn as you go. I figured I would bring in what I thought people would want, and then I would let the community tell me what they wanted and let our assortment kind of evolve as I learn more about the community.
Yeah. Did you take into account demographics of Portsmouth? Skews older, skews whites? Were these things that you were thinking
Absolutely.
about? Yeah.
Yes. Like I would love to bring in every single diverse book that I can. I want to bring in all the banned books. I want to elevate the voices that aren't heard as often. But I also know who's shopping here. So it's a balance of pleasing the clientele with what they want to see and then maybe challenging them with something they wouldn't have picked up on their own.
Now, what's cool here is you have a community picks section.
I do.
Where people can just come into the store and write in a book that you guys don't have but should have on the shelves. And then you honor those requests sometimes. Yeah.
So we don't have to not carry it. It's really just something that someone feels passionate about and wants to recommend. So pretty much any store you walk into, there will be staff picks. And we have staff picks too. But we wanted to empower community members to recommend books to each other and start conversations amongst themselves. And so in as much space as we've dedicated to our staff picks, we've dedicated even more space to our community picks. So we have little cards that people fill out, just their first name and then the title and the author and then why this is a must read. And so people fill out a little card. And then I will order in a few copies of each of them and display them so people can see what other people are reading. And I mean, I haven't rotated them out yet, but they get like about a month or so. And then I bring in a new batch so that everyone can also see their name and shining lights in the store too. Like that's kind of fun to see a book that you recommended with your name on the shelf.
Okay. So a big part of your observations from all the bookstores that you've been at in the past was it needs more than just books to sustain itself as a business. So we've got some fun, eclectic gifts. We have a bar. Starting with the bar, you have a bunch of local beer, cold brew as well. Why was this important to you to have the local beverages offered here?
I said from the beginning, I really wanted this to be community first, and I wanted to support local businesses, and that extends to what we carry. So all of our beers are local, I'd say within 30 to 50 miles of where we are now. And our coffee is local. Our tea is local.
Coffee's very good, by the way. You've made me a cup of coffee today. You said it's the first time that you've done it.
Yes.
It's fantastic. I don't know if I'm blowing up your spot by saying that.
I have never made a pot of coffee before in my life. You heard it here first because I don't drink coffee. So
I feel like coffee and books go hand in hand. It's true,
but I'm trying to make beer and books go hand in hand. But we certainly have coffee.
Yeah.
And we have tea, which is more my thing. And I think tea and books also go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And now wine and books are becoming a thing too.
I love that. Okay, very cool. So you've got a bunch of goodies around here. Some of the things that I'm seeing in my purview right now, I see a little gift bag that says, quote, could be a bag of dicks. You also have another thing that says, happy fucking birthday. So you've got a lot of things here that are explicit. And I'm wondering how this has been received. On a previous episode of the show, I talked to the owner of Flamingo's Coffee Bar in Exeter, and their phrase is support your local caffeine dealer.
That's cute.
And she heard from a couple parents in the school district, like, you're encouraging our kids to do drugs and whatnot. And so I'm just wondering how the Portsmouth community so far in the few weeks that you've been open has received this different take on selling things.
It's so funny that you asked that, because that specific bag, could be a bag of dicks, was one that some of my staff was like, this is funny, but maybe we should not put it directly in the doorway because we don't want to offend anybody. I have reordered that bag 3 times. That is our best-selling bag. It goes like crazy. People love it. I would say my favorite was, I think I had 2 different people in the Christmas season buy that bag and say, I'm going to give this to my boss. I'm like, I hope you have a good relationship with your boss.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So I have not had any resistance to the swearing or anything like that. I'm a snarky girl. I think a lot of book people are snarky people, and I don't know, we're just an open and affirming environment for everyone, and so people's views and their words are safe here.
So just in my uneducated opinion, I feel like people who frequent bookstores isn't the same clientele who would be into bags that say could be a bag of dicks. Am I wrong in this?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Well, first of all, I was never trying to be traditional. That's the whole thing here, is I wanted a non-traditional business model for a traditional business. And I think if you spent some time here, you would find all sorts of people who have all sorts of ways of expressing themselves. And so I think we try to speak to everyone.
What's your favorite non-traditional item in this place?
It's currently put away from the holiday season, but it's so silly. I'm a big gnome fan.
Gnome?
There are a lot of gnomes around here if you look carefully.
Okay.
And so I brought in this thing. It's like a gnome topper for a wine bottle. So it's like you put it on your wine bottle, and then your wine bottle suddenly has like a beard and a hat and a gnome nose.
How does one become a fan of gnomes? I've never heard.
Gnomes are so hot. Are you serious?
Tell me more, please. Convince me.
I mean, I would say gnomes are so hot right now, but I think gnomes have been hot for maybe 2 years now.
I'm not tapped into the gnome scene, apparently.
I think you're missing out.
Apparently. So when you guys opened in December, like I said, there was a lot of anticipation for the opening. How did the opening go? How was it received?
The opening was fantastic, and it happened to be 10 days before Christmas too. So not only were people just like rearing to get in here, they also were rearing to get their holiday shopping done. So we had just a huge show of support the first week or two. I have not heard a single negative comment from anyone. Everyone's just so supportive. They're so happy we're here. They're really excited to be here. They're excited to come back and to tell all their friends. And so that's been amazing, just getting that humongous outpouring of support from the community. Like I've been waiting to hear a complaint or get a bad review on Google or something, and it hasn't happened yet. I know it will.
Some point. It's coming.
It's a rite of passage.
Someone's not going to like the bag of dicks.
It's going to. Yeah. I wonder if that's going to be the thing, right?
I hope so. We're putting that into existence right now.
Manifests that I'm going to get a complaint about the bag of dicks. Yeah. And I get the same compliment over and over and over again, which means a lot to me, which is that the selection here is amazing. The book selection.
Oh, I'm sure that hits right in your book lover heart.
It does, because this was such a labor of love filling up this store with books, and it felt never ending, just ordering books, and the shelves still weren't full and still weren't full and still weren't full. And we were getting closer to opening and there were still holes in the shelves, and it was driving me crazy. And I just wanted to fill the space in a way that people could find what they were looking for, but also find what they weren't looking for. And so hearing from so many people that they love our selection has just meant everything to me.
Openings of businesses tend to be sloppy just because there's so many moving pieces. You're really doing it for the first time. You can't practice that in the months leading up to the opening. So I'm wondering, did anything go wrong in the first week or two? Any unexpected challenges that you hadn't anticipated?
Yeah. So we had a soft opening a week before we opened to the public, which was it was about 20 people. It was some of our vendors and friends, and we wanted to test out our systems to make sure that we knew how to handle cashing people out and like different weird scenarios that might come up. And we learned a lot from that night. First of all, that night we burnt something in the kitchen.
Good thing you have a fob permit or whatever.
So that was a fun one. And we also ended up changing our point of sale system in the bar from that book system to Square, because the book system was pretty clunky with the bar. So there were a lot of last minute adjustments that we made. But so far, like we've had some issues with electricity. We've had some issues with a leak here or there, but nothing catastrophic yet.
Well, I'm sure that's coming along with a bad review. No, I'm just kidding. You guys do a bunch of, or want to get into having some events here. What is on the agenda in 2025?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, we're going for more of a non-traditional bookstore model. So you're not necessarily going to find just typical author signings, which is what you would normally see in a bookstore. I wanted events that really, again, put the community first and brought people together. And so a lot of our events are going to be around the bar. So we are planning to have literary trivia, which I'm excited about. Eventually, we'll invite people to read their work as well. And we have a few book clubs on the horizon.
Wow.
So the first one that we have unveiled is actually a partnership with an existing book club in Kittery called Pros Before Bros. It's a great name. And they are a romance book club. And so their first meeting here in the store is going to be the week of Valentine's Day. So it's going to be kind of like a Galentine's Day event. And we capped it at 40 people, and 40 people signed up in less than 24 hours.
Wow.
So we have a waiting list for that already, which was an incredible response. We were very surprised by it, especially because I said we don't have that many romance readers here. I guess they're all hiding in Kittery, maybe. I don't know. But so that's happening. And we're also partnering with Loaded Question Brewery for their book club.
Nice.
So we're rolling out that partnership in the next couple months too. So
any idea on what that will look like?
Yeah, we just sort of nailed down the details. We're still making our marketing materials. But the idea is if you buy the book here, you get a discount. And then if you have bought the book here, you get a discount on your beers on book club night.
Love that.
Yeah. And then we'll have 2 of our own book clubs that the first meetings will be in the spring. So we'll be announcing that probably in February. We're going to have a nonfiction book club, which I think is kind of atypical for book clubs. So I'm excited for people to read something that they maybe wouldn't have picked up before, but in a safe space where they have people to talk about it with. And then we're going to have a rotating genre book club. So genres are very big, as you probably know, like sci-fi, fantasy, thriller, all of that. And so we're going to do a different genre every time. So again, it's an opportunity for people to try reading outside of their comfort zone.
Interesting. I only read nonfiction. I'm a nonfiction snob.
Are you going to join our book club?
You're going to have to convince me to get out of my reading comfort zone. I'm very bullish on nonfiction only.
Well, what types of nonfiction?
So I majored in U.S. history, so I love history books. I love biographies and memoirs, and I love educational books in nature, like heavily researched. I'm reading, maybe you guys have it here, the Anxious Generation, which a lot of people are, that one's flying off the shelves. I'm reading that. Things like that is what I'm really into.
Well, those are the kind of things that we'll be reading.
Oh, okay, great. Then I'm in.
And then, a few things that might be outside of your reading comfort zone.
Okay.
It's a gentle nudge. It's not a forcing.
Well, your people will talk to my people. A couple more questions, and then I will get you out of here so you can read your romance novels.
Yeah, so I can open the store.
Yeah, or that. So you said a bookstore was something that you were thinking about for a long time, really when you started your publishing career. And now that you finally have this bookstore in a prominent area in Portsmouth and it's opened and everything is going well, what emotions come to mind for you as you reflect on the long road it's been to get you to this point?
I'm still not sure that it's hit me yet.
Yeah.
That it has happened. There will be occasional moments here and there where I'll just sit here and just kind of like survey the store and feel like, oh, wow, I did this. And this is this existed in my brain for so long. And now it's real and it's exactly what I wanted it to be. And I'm proud of myself and I'm excited and thrilled. But I'm still, I think, a little bit numb to the to the reality of like dreams coming true, you know?
Very cool. And then we talked at the beginning of the episode about the state of the book industry. So I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts, because prevailing wisdom, person who's not tapped into this might think Amazon has killed the book industry. But I read an article a few weeks ago that Barnes & Noble, which we presumed for a while would follow the same fate as Borders, is actually experiencing a comeback of sorts, and they're actually opening stores rather than closing stores. So I'm just really curious, as someone who has lived and breathed books for so long from several different aspects of the industry, I'm wondering just generally how you would assess the current health of the book business.
I think the independent bookselling business has never been stronger. I think new bookstores are popping up all the time, and interesting concepts too. Like there are a lot of romance bookstores that are opening now. It should be interesting to see if the romance trend lasts indefinitely or if that's something that kind of has a shelf life. I don't know. As far as what you said about Barnes & Noble, so that's interesting too, because Barnes & Noble is under new ownership. It's the owner of Waterstones in the UK that now owns Barnes & Noble. And in the last few years, they've really made an effort to make it more local and more community first, whereas for so many years, it was just a formula and every Barnes & Noble would carry the same books and the same number of those and the same selection. And now they're trying to localize a little bit more, and people are responding to that. So I think it's just a sign that local business is having a renaissance. Yeah. If people really invest in the communities, it pays off.
Very cool. Well, Nissa, thank you so much for joining me today. We have one final question. We ask this same final question at the end of every episode, every week, and I'll ask it to you. Nissa, knowing what you know now about how things have turned out, what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self?
22-year-old self. I think my 22-year-old self was very idealistic and had big dreams. And I would always encourage people to have big dreams and go after them. But I think I would say that there's work to do and a path to follow to get where you want to go. And you will get there. You have to put in the time and the dedication. And then you'll find yourself at 36 opening your own bookstore.
That's Nissa Bagelman, the owner of Reedmor Books and Brews in downtown Portsmouth. To learn more about their offerings or their book clubs, follow them on Instagram at Reedmor_books or visit their website, the links to which are in today's show notes. Thanks for listening. And if you see me around town this week, perhaps at Reedmor, Blue Harbor Coffee, or on the C&J bus, please stop me and say hi. I would love to hear your story. As for next week's episode with one of my favorite people on the Seacoast, here's a sneak peek.
It's also just such a fucking amazing thing to come together with a whole bunch of other people and just like be your freaky self and know that nobody is judging you.
That's next week on Seacoast Stories. Until then, have a great week. Live free or die.